shapeshifter at Boost Masquerade, hiding both face and mind, all free for you to draw. I'm a shapeshifter. What else should I be? Please don't take off my mask, revealing dark. Moments of calm, nothing left to be found. A mirror right in front of me, that's where I found an empty glass, reflecting that's a truth. It's telling what's not to be told. I need that mask. I can't tell you how to see me. Just a cage of bones. There's nothing inside. Will it unleash me, burning down the walls? Is there a way for me to break? I'm a shapeshifter at Post Masquerade, hiding both face and mind, all free for you to draw. I'm a shapeshifter, have no face to show. Please don't take off my mask, my disguise.
Hey everybody, it's me, Jordan, maybe 30 bats, and I thought that it would be kind of fun if we sat down and talked a little bit about what it's like to run D&D, run tabletop role-playing games in general, but Dungeons & Dragons is my preferred system. It's the one I'm most familiar with. But thought we could sit and talk a little bit about some roleplay fundamentals, some things that have to do with running the game, and what that's like, how that's different from maybe playing the game as a player character. So I'm gonna have the chat open. I'm gonna be looking at it. I'm gonna be watching it. Whatever we want to talk about with regard to that stuff, I'm real cool about it. First off, there's a little bit about me that maybe you want to know. Who am I to be talking about this stuff anyway, right? Like, I'm not Matt Mercer. I'm not Matt Colville. I'm not any of the million other incredible GMs and DMs on the internet. So You know, who am I to be talking about this stuff? Well,
You know what I heard? This whole
for one thing, I mean, I've been doing this for about 10 years. I've been running games since I was like 19
promise you'll take me
in high school, and like so many other people. And I've made a lot of mistakes on the way, but I've learned a lot of really cool things, and I hope that I can pass some of that stuff along to you. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about that. You know, I've run Dungeons and Dragons. I've run some. I've actually playtested some games and helped develop them. A little game called Tactical Ops, which you probably haven't heard of. I've run some Shadowrun stuff. I've done several little D20 projects. There's a game called Spycraft that I've run before. I've had the great pleasure of playing in an excellent Legend of the Five Rings campaign. Which, if you've never checked out the Legend of the Five Rings tabletop role-playing system, do it. It's awesome. Samurai. I mean, how can you get cooler? All that to say, I've been in and around tabletop gaming for about 10 years, as far as the role-playing game aspect goes. I've never gotten into wargaming. I've never gotten into strategy gaming very much. But as far as tabletop RPGs go, I'm into it. I was also a theater kid. And that helps me a little bit, because theater gives you an opportunity to just pretend to be someone else, and it gives you practice in a safe place to do that. And so that's something that I've really treasured, is the ability to step into someone else's shoes and see what they would do in a situation that maybe I would not, or maybe that I would. So I've been doing this for, you know, like I said, about 10 years, just playing games with my friends, and learning a lot of really interesting lessons along the way, and I'm hoping that I can pass some of that stuff on to you. We're going to be doing this somewhat regularly on Wednesdays. If we can keep that up, I'll try. But yeah, we're gonna keep this up. And so what I'm gonna try to do every time we stream this stuff is take a few hours and talk through some of the stuff that has to do with running the game. Whatever your tabletop system is, we're going to try to keep this as system agnostic as we can, but I'm going to speak a lot from my experience as a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master. My first thing that I want to talk about a little bit is, what is a role-playing game? We're seeing a lot of popularity with role-playing games recently. That's something that brings me a lot of joy, a lot of happiness, something that I am really, really proud of for the RPG community. I mean, everybody's heard of the Adventure Zone and Critical Role, and a few people have heard of what is now called the Greetings Adventurers podcast. Started off as the Drunks and Dragons podcast, which I think is such a better name, but you know, they got sponsors mad at them about it. But we've heard of the YouTube channels that belong to guys like Matt Colville, who talk about, you know, the history of D&D and the way that he runs games now because of that stuff, and all the cool stuff they get up to. It's become more popular than ever for people to pick up the dice, write down stuff on a character sheet, or use a digital tool for that, which I love the digital tools. Sit down at a table, or get in on a Zoom call or a Skype session or Hangouts or Google Meetings or whatever you're using, and play online or in person. It's become especially important now that we are limited in our social contact. It's become really important to be able to get together with people and have fun. But none of this tells you what a role-playing game is, right? We've had this chance to get together and play these games, but what are they? You know, it's becoming massively popular, but what is it? Simply put, a role-playing game is a game in which you play a role. And that sounds like such a smart-ass way to put that, but it's true, right? when you sit down to play Monopoly, you're not playing, you know, the oil baron Richard G. Hofstadter. You know, you're not playing the train tycoon Millicent Q Farnsworth. You know, and those are names that I'm throwing out from nowhere. If there's anyone out there by the names Richard B. Hofstadter or Millicent Q Farnsworth, I'm sorry to have used your names. But yeah, it's not you're not playing a person, you're just playing a game, right? You're rolling dice, sure. You're making moves, sure. You're enacting strategy, yes, but you're not playing a character. Now, how is that different from video games? Well, when you sit down and play a tabletop role-playing game, there's an important word there. Tabletop. You're sitting in a shared space. Now, that can be a virtual thing, that can be an in-person thing, whatever. You're sharing a space with people, and you are starting to interact with them as the primary thing in the game. You're interacting with them and a constructed world that you've all agreed upon, in which you play roles. Now, there are ways to play tabletop role-playing games, or just RPGs. We'll just use that for shorthand. RPGs, not rocket-propelled grenades. Role-playing games, but we will. But there are ways that you can play RPGs with just one player, and no game runner, no game runner, no anything. My camera's frozen, but we'll figure it out. No game runner or anything, and you're just having a little adventure on your own. That's possible, but it's not nearly as close to the spirit of the game, right? So, tabletop role-playing games are games in which you play a role with other people at a tabletop, using a set of game rules. Have I made enough of that yet? I mean, I feel like I'm just rambling, but you know, honestly, it's me and my bot army right now. But the fact stands that other people get involved in this. Oh, my buddy Cheese in the chat. Good to see you, buddy. And so this is a collaborative effort. Now, a collaborative effort to do what is really the question that comes out of that. What's the collaborative effort that these people are getting around a table together, virtual or not, to do? Why are they there? Well, a lot of people will give a different answer to that than others. You know, you ask a GM, you'll get a different answer. You know, ask 3 GMs, you'll probably get 4 different answers, 5. Because it's sort of a nebulous thing. What are you there to do? The basic answer that seems to be popular now is to have an adventure, or to tell a story. But not just your character having an adventure, it's not just your character telling a story. It's your table, your group, your party, as it were, getting together to tell a story together. They're going to face difficulties. They're going to overcome obstacles. They're going to fight. They're going to have combat. They're going to argue. They're going to do silly things. They're going to tell a story. They're going to have an adventure together. And that's the beautiful thing about it. Now, you may ask, how does that happen? I mean, do you just sit down and say, okay, well, my name is Slaughter Bartfast, and I am an adventurer. Hello, I'm fantastic. Can't tell me I'm doing anything wrong. No, that's absurd, right? Because if everybody sat down and did that, it would end up becoming that game we all played as kids, right? Where somebody decides they're going to shoot their laser gun and shoot the person across the room. Let's say it's you. Your best friend is over at the house. They're shooting their laser gun. They're shooting it at you, and you've been hit. But have you been hit? You decide, no. I am wearing laser-proof armor. And that's when the argument begins, right? They say, I shot you. Nuh-uh, laser armor. Well, my laser is so powerful that it got through your laser armor and it really hit you. Well, yeah, but I've got a mirror on underneath and it shot back at you and you don't have any laser armor. And so, like, you have this conflict, right? This thing that needs to be resolved. Well, how do we resolve conflict when people sit around a table to play roles and accomplish some goal of telling a story or having an adventure? Well, first, you've got rules, right? Somebody sat down and they decided, this is how we resolve things. We roll a die, or we, you know, like pull a card, or we play rock, paper, scissors, or whatever. And whoever wins or loses that, depending on whatever factors, wins or loses that, depending on those factors that we all agreed upon. There are rules to this. There's a structure to this game. Now, a lot of times, that gets resolved with dice. And I have some very pretty dice here that I love very much. These are gorgeous metal dice that I picked up from, well, they're not paying me to say who, but it's from Arcana Vault. Really great company. Fast shippers nowadays, that's important. But we roll these dice and we compare these numbers to statistics that we've written down about our characters, according to whatever rule set we're using, right? For me, that's D&D 5th edition most of the time. So if I'm checking to resolve something, check. There's an important word. We're going to roll a check and add the relevant modifiers to that check, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative. And we're going to see if I succeed or fail compared to the relative difficulty of that task. That's a lot of information. But, you know, people learn it. It's easy. You know, when you're sitting around a table full of other people who know this, or other people who are learning it, it's easy to remember that you roll your 20-sided die, your D20, and you compare your result. That's a natural 1 for anybody who doesn't know that. That is the worst possible result that could come from that. You're going in jail. But yeah, so you know, you roll a die, you compare it to your difficulty number, your difficulty class in Dungeons and Dragons, difficulty class DC, and you see if you succeed or fail at the thing you were trying to do, and you agree that that's what happens. So we talked a little bit about role-playing games, what they are, how people play them, but how do we resolve disputes? How do we set up the difficulty of things? Who decides how hard it is for you to who decides how hard it is for you to do something? Who decides how easy it is? Who plays the rest of the world? Think about a video game where you've walked through an empty town or an area that hadn't quite loaded in yet. Is there anything more uncomfortable than that in a game, where you walk in and nobody's there? The place is clean, the lights are all on, there's not a jump scare getting set up, nobody's home. You're just walking through a pristine wasteland. Boring, right? Creepy, right? Like, I'm convinced there's no worse experience in gaming than showing up in an empty place where there should be stuff. Well, who fills the place with stuff? Who makes the place up? Who says you're in this place? Well, that is your game master, or dungeon master, or referee, or narrator, or storyteller. Every system has a different way to talk about the person who adjudicates and arbitrates the rules. The person who sets up the situations and how they set up those situations. For Dungeons and Dragons, that's the Dungeon Master, or DM, the role that I've basically been playing for the last 10 years. What we do is we get a group of people to sit around a table and agree to play a game where they have an adventure according to rules, playing characters in a world that I construct, that you construct for them to play in. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's what I've spent the first 20 minutes of this stream talking about. We're going to talk about how to make a world. We're going to talk about how to fill it with interesting people. Hey, Spade, we're going to talk about how to provide opportunities for fun. Because that really is the GM's job, the DM's job, is to provide fun opportunities. To provide risk and reward, yes, but ultimately to give people chances at having fun with the characters that they have created, because they want to have fun. You know how we know they want to have fun? Because they're playing a game. Nobody plays a game to not have fun. If they do, I really question their sanity. But that's what we're going to talk about in this stuff. So something that I want to know from you, anyone who's in here, anyone who comes to these future streams, because this is going to be more of a weekly event, I think. I want to know what you want to know about running the game, about setting up the game, about getting into dungeon mastering, game mastering. RPGs are so cool. I could sit here and tell you a million stories about legendary people. Stories of loss, of laughter, of despair and romance, hope, triumph over evil, loss to evil, great loss, and great victory. But those stories will only get you so far. I'm here to teach you how to make your own stories, how to give your friends the chance to be heroes or villains of great magnitude, the chance to have fun. Because that's what this is about. So I'm going to be back in just a few minutes. Take a little break, get a little water. When I get back, we are going to talk. We're going to talk about designing your world. So I'll be right back, guys. Thanks for hanging in with me. See you in a minute. All right, welcome back. Thanks for hanging in. Good to see you, Spade. Good to see everybody in the chat here. But we're going to keep talking a little bit. Right now, what we're going to move along to, now that we've talked about what RPGs are, what a GM or DM's job is, it's only appropriate that we talk a little bit about what kind of game you're gonna play. Now, some people will leave this up to their GM or DM entirely. Others will insist upon having a little bit of a say in the matter. Now, I am of the strong opinion, and if you ask anybody, they're going to have probably a different one or a different take on the one that I'm about to express. But I am of the strong opinion that a game played together is best done with joint decisions shaping the kind of game that you're playing, and it's a collaborative effort. Now, when we talk about the kind of game we want to play, you want to have some considerations in place for effectively 3 things. 1, what set of rules are you going to play by? What game are you playing? Are you playing Dungeons and Dragons? Are you playing D20 Modern? Are you playing Cyberpunk 2077? Are you playing Savage Worlds, Fate? Are you playing Legend of the Five Rings? What rules are you gonna play by? It seems like a fairly basic decision, and a lot of times that happens very naturally. Especially with new groups. Someone will say, hey, I really want to play D&D. Or, I've been watching this show, I've been listening to this podcast, I've been talking with my friends, and I'd really love to play, GURPS, or Savage Worlds, or Fate, or Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever. A million different systems out there. But usually someone will say, hey, I want to play this game, and, I've heard you run games. Or, do you want to run it? Or, I want to play this game, I'm thinking about running it, do you want to play? So you need to decide what set of rules you're going by. And that's an important thing to figure out. I mean, it's also a really easy thing to figure out. Do you want to have I don't know. My camera does very stupid things occasionally. I'm very sorry for that. I'm trying to figure out what that problem is, but do you have a game preference that you like to run? I suggest that you figure that out. Or just pick up a game. See if you like the rules. See if you understand it. There are core rule books to all of these things, and they're all readily available. Borrow them from a friend. Check them out at the library. I do not endorse piracy, but a lot of people have gotten a hold of games that way and gotten into the hobby that way. I don't recommend it. It's illegal. Don't do that. But it's happened before. And there are also digital tools for D&D especially. D&D Beyond has become a really, really, really strong resource, and you can actually check on the overlay here, and you can see the characters from my current campaign, Vibe Check, which is live every other Friday. This Friday at 6 p.m. on A Penny Price, which is another Twitch channel. I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat, so that I can plug myself here, and you can see some of this stuff in action. But yeah, A Penny Price is where we have Vibe Check every other Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we decided what rules we wanted to play in that game. We said, some people have expressed interest in playing a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons campaign. I piped up and said, yeah, I'd love to run a 5e campaign. I'd love to do it. And then I was stuck with what to do. I was stuck with coming up with what kind of game we wanted to play. We had figured out the rules, and now it was time to talk about genre. Genre is the big second thing, or if you're Alex Trebek, genre. What kind of game do you want this to be? Do you want it to be like a film noir detective thing? Do you want it to be high adventure on the seas? Do you want it to be a grindy dungeon crawl? Do you want it to be political intrigue? Do you want to have adventures like they had in Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia, or do you want it to be a Greek gods thing like the Percy Jackson books? Or do you want it to be something dark and gritty and realistic, and you want to have it be, a crawl through the depths of the underbelly of the world, and maybe if you know something about D&D, you want it to be through the Underdark, or maybe you want to crawl around in the caves and things as you journey toward the center of the earth, or whatever. Where do you want this to even be set? But you can figure that stuff out, right? Through figuring out what rules you're playing, what works well, you also want to figure out your genre. What sort of game is this going to be? What's the tone of this game going to be? What's its themes and objectives going to look like? And you're also going to figure out your setting. Now, for us in Vibe Check, we figured out that we wanted to play a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition tabletop role-playing game. We're going to use the 5e rules. We're going to create 5e characters. It's going to use 5e stuff, 5th edition stuff. Now, as we did that, it came to light that we wanted to have sort of a standard adventure story, but what kind? Now we're going to talk a little bit about the extension of genre into setting. Genre does not necessarily exist in storytelling as its own thing, in my opinion. Now, we're going to have people who disagree with that assessment, for sure. I have many friends with many strong opinions about that issue precisely. However, this is my stream, and I get to have my opinions. If you have different opinions, good, because that means that you get to, become a more rounded, well-orbed person. But when we talk about genre, we typically are also thinking about setting. Those things don't necessarily need to be linked, but they often are. So when we said, I want to do sort of a high fantasy adventure thing, okay, so that sets us in a setting, but it does not give us necessarily a fully realized genre. We said we want a fantasy world with lots of adventure. What kind of adventure do you want to have in this fantasy world? And so I gave my players some options. What makes those options up? This is going to be something that we talk about for a second, so settle in. When you're providing options to people for what kind of adventure they want to have, when you're designing an adventure and coming up with a campaign, I find it very helpful to think of adventures as being made of several components. One component is exploration. Another component, social interaction. Another component, combat. Another component, or conflict. Important thing. Combat or conflict. And a fourth thing, party interaction. Party involvement. Right? When you take those 4 pillars of narrative building, you can arrange them in order of priority for your people. Now, I knew with Vibe Check because all of my players are already friends in real life, and I'm friends with them, I knew that they wanted to have plenty of party interaction, party involvement. That's easy. Everything that your characters do in the world is party involvement. Every scene they're in, they're sometimes the star, sometimes not the star, but they're always involved. Now, the great thing about that is you can sort of let that go. You can say, okay, they're involved. Great. They're going to be involved. What are the other three pillars going to do? Well, when we're talking about that, we want to understand what's important to our players. And we'll talk more about this concept probably later, maybe later tonight, possibly in another stream. But when we're talking to our players, we want to understand what's important to them. And so one way we can discover that is we can say, okay, do we want something that's more focused on combat and fighting and conflict? Or do we want something that's more focused on exploration of the world and discovering massive wonders of the world, or interesting secrets about the world, or history or lore? Or do we want something that's more socially focused, a political focus maybe, or an intrigue sort of campaign? And so what I did was I wrote up a few different scenarios for that and handed them off to my players, and I said, hey, do you want something that is more combat forward, more social forward, like more social political forward, or do you want something that's more exploration forward? What they came back with was they wanted something that was more exploration and social emphasis, definitely with combat involved, but not as the sole purpose of the campaign. Now, that's a more nuanced answer than I asked for, and that's not a bad thing. Anytime your players give you more detail than you asked for, welcome it. As long as you're working within the rules and within, narrative fair play. You don't want, you don't necessarily want your players writing your whole world for you or rewriting the world that you've set up for them, but you do want them to have the ability to influence it and to change it. So we've talked about what kind of rules we want to have. We've talked about what kind of genre we want to have. We've talked a little bit about setting, but we've not talked about it much. Setting is what most people think of when they talk about world building. Now, this is something that we've heard all the time. I've built my world, or in my world, my players do this, or in my world, we do this. That can sound pretty crazy to an outsider, or really intimidating to a beginner. I'm going to take a page from the book of a guy named John Four, who is a fantastic GM, and I really look up to him. John Four has this theory that you can have sort of a map of your world and a general idea of where different locations might be, and even what might be in those locations in a general sense. But you don't have to build it until your players are about to go there. Or you don't have to build it until your antagonist becomes involved in that location, or with those people, or with that artifact, or whatever. World building is something that gets decided bit by bit. Don't think that you have to have an entire setting figured out from day one. That's frankly kind of crazy. Don't do that to yourself. No one mind can hold all that stuff. No notebook that's navigable can hold that stuff, and then you go through it and use it like it's some pre-written module. Pre-written modules are fine as well, by the way. If you're not homebrewing, they're great. They're fantastic resources. I steal from them all the time. They're really, really great tools. But I'm not going to focus on how to use a pre-written adventure, because they're pretty good at explaining themselves. I might explain how to integrate a pre-written adventure into your world at a later date, but right now I want to talk about homebrewing and home design of campaigns. So, my first piece of advice: if you are going to write your own setting, if you're going to configure your own campaign, if you're going to invent a setting, only write the bits of it that are important right now. And then have some sketchy notes on like the 2 or 3 places that could be important next. One of the great memes of the D&D community, of the tabletop RPG community, is that your players never do what you want them to do. And sometimes, yes, people will go off the rails because what you've done is you've given them freedom to choose things. At least I hope you have. If you're restricting freedom from your players and they didn't agree to that, then you're killing their fun, and I recommend you not do it. Give them choice. Give them at least the illusion of choice, because that's fun. But where was I? Sorry, I always get distracted by the don't railroad your players thing. But yes, we have this instinct that our players might do what we ask them to do, or we think they ought to do, and oftentimes that's not the case. You know, they usually don't do the thing that exactly we thought we would do as a group. You know, your rogue might decide to go off and just start robbing the neighborhood. Your bard might decide that now is a really great time to build their fan base in this town and see if they can take their act on tour. Your barbarian might join a circus, start juggling audience members. You know, like whatever. You know, your fighter might open a training academy. You know, it's completely unpredictable. Your group may even pick up on the plot hooks, and we'll talk about what those are later. The plot hooks that you lay down for them to pick up and go on the adventure that you planned to run. Now, a lot of this can be avoided with a good session 0, which is something we've mentioned before. But people have freedom, and you need to be able to accommodate that freedom, because that's part of the point of the game, is that you're having this adventure and telling the story together. They're not telling the story that you wrote. They're telling the story that you all agreed to tell together. And that story does not have one author, it has many. So, my recommendation for setting building, for world building in a new campaign setting, is have a good idea as to the people who populate this area that your characters are in, the things that are available to explore and fight and interact with socially, the places they can stay or assault, or whatever, have a party. Have an idea as to what those places are, where they are, and have some notes on the areas that they could reasonably reach within a regular period of time, on foot maybe. Now, those sketchy notes, what do they include? We'll get there in a second, but first I want to recap that we've talked about what a tabletop role-playing game is, which is a game that people sit around a table, play characters together with a shared set of rules, being negotiated and arbitrated by another player who is called the dungeon master or game master or referee, whatever. And that this game takes place in a world which is facilitated by that game master, that dungeon master. They are the person who sets up the obstacles in the game and provides the players, the PCs, the player characters, opportunities to succeed or fail, however they want to try to do it within the rules. So we've talked about that, what a tabletop role-playing game is. We've also begun talking about how you begin to play a game, which is, which is the Dungeon Master, because we're talking about D&D primarily. The Dungeon Master sets up a setting in which a game of a certain genre, under certain rules, which are chosen, hopefully collaboratively, is played. And so we've begun to talk a little bit about how you build that setting, how you organize the world around your players, how you connect them to it, and give them opportunities to explore. Now, we're going to take a short break so that I can get some water, and I'm going to talk a little bit when I get back about Session 0, what that is, and how it helps us. So stick around. I'm going to be back in like 5 minutes, and we'll see you in a bit. You want them to have as much fun as possible and as few arguments as possible, right? Right? Okay. So that ended on a really flattering frame. And so this is what session 0 is for. You want to talk about, again, you want to remind folks, this is the kind of game that we've agreed to play, okay? Here are the things that could cause conflict that we want to get out of the way now so that we can have as much fun later as we can. Okay? Now, this is going to be different for every group. Every GM, every DM is going to have different stuff that they want to talk about in session 0. But there's a few things that I think everybody should talk about, right? And that's not entirely my invention. Now, anyone knows that a good artist has skill. A great artist steals everything that they can. And so I use a modified version of a session 0 checklist that was published on Reddit in the D&D Next subreddit by a user by the name of Haze Zero, HAZEZERO. This stuff is golden to me. And so the preamble to this, and I'm just going to read this here from the post. Perhaps you're a new DM, or perhaps you're a veteran DM, but seemingly always forget that one topic to cover in session 0. Perhaps you're a veteran player starting with a new DM. This guide is here to serve as a checklist for potential DMs for the topics you could discuss with your players during a session 0. This list of topics are things I've come up with over the years as I've DM'd, I being Haze Zero, but also things that I've gathered from the shared online and offline experiences of others. Know also that this is something of an interactive guide. If you feel there's an important topic should be discussed in session 0 that I missed, feel free to suggest it. If I agree, I'll add it to this article, credit you for the addition. Now, this is more than just a checklist of stuff you ought to talk about. It's discussions. These are flashpoints for discussion that you should have with your players. Because when you talk about this stuff in session 0, you can say, okay, are we okay with this? Are we not? What options do you want to do? Because this is not just my table. A lot of people say that. This is my table. Like they own the thing. It's my house, my rules. It might be your house, but they live here too. And you should respect that. This is our table. I just happen to be the one who runs the game at our table. There's some authority that goes with that, but ultimately it's our table because it's our game. So chill out, okay? Now the session 0 material. A lot of this has to do with whether we have certain things in the game or not. A lot of this has to do with how we behave at the table. A lot of this has to do with how we resolve conflict when it comes up. And what they can expect from me, the DM, what I can expect from them, the players, with regard to content and topics that may or may not show up. How we create characters, when we create characters, what's allowed. We want to remind folks of what type of game we're playing. We want to talk about the general mechanics, stuff that might be fuzzy in the game. We want to talk about, what happens when you throw a critical, either success or failure. Do they exist? You want to talk about, how stealth works. Sure, talk about it. You want to talk about NPCs, non-player characters, and creatures in the game. How they work. How you can expect your players to interact with them. How rare are magic items? What kinds of things are we doing with spells that are different? Is there anything different around death or resurrection or resting? What ethical concerns do you have? We could talk about this stuff all night and just list things, but I find that it's useful to go through an existing list of this stuff and figure out what's important to your group. With Vibe Check, I knew that I was working with a very empathetic group of people, and I'm so thankful for that, guys. If you're watching this, I love you. You're all fantastic. And so I knew, we're not playing an evil campaign. It's just not gonna happen. Call me she's a crybaby. I'm gonna go. No, you're fantastic. You're wonderful. Lorenzo Nightbane is one of the shining lights of that campaign, and he's only gonna get brighter. But anyhow, when we talk session 0, what we're really doing is we are coming up with things that might be conflict and covering our bases as best we can. With Vibe Check, we talked about something that's a hard no for us, and it's a subject that I'm not even going to mention on this stream because it does not bear civilized discussion. That particular topic will not show up in Vibe Check. It is my solemn guarantee to my players that it will not be a part of anyone's backstory. It will not be a part of any quest. It will not be something which is visited upon the players as punishment from the bad guys. It is not something that NPCs will experience at the hands of evil people. It does not exist in our world. And that's okay. I want to say that again. It does not exist in our world, and that's okay. Because we decided as a table, as a group of human beings, we decided, I don't want to play a game that has that in it. Just don't. And so I said, all right, awesome. I'm fully in agreement with you. What happens when something gets brought up as a no-go that you're fine with, but your players don't want to see? Don't do it. Be kind to your players. A lot of DMs talk about, and I do the same thing sometimes. Talk about, oh, this is gonna hurt them. This is not gonna be fun. In sort of that facetious, this is gonna be dramatic and hard sort of way. That's fine as long as your players have signed up to do that kind of thing. My players knew that there were going to be some heart-wrenching things that happened in their campaign, and several have already. But it's okay to do that with the stuff that they agree to. It's never okay to do that with the stuff they don't agree to, the stuff they disagree with. Even if you don't know that they don't want it. Now, this is something that I'm going to say you should include in every single session 0 ever, right? Is the question, when something comes up that surprises us that we don't want in the game, how do we deal with that? When conflict arises, like something in the game that offends our personal sensibilities that we don't want to play with, that's an important distinction. You can have things that offend your sensibilities that you do want to play with, but we're talking about things that surprise us with our disgust for it as human beings. How do we deal with that? We decided with Vibe Check, we'll just be able to say, hey, let's take a break. I need to talk about this. That's fine. We've done that. We found that out. In a lizard folk village when a child died in combat. One of my players spoke up, said, hey, let's take a break. We took the break. We discussed it like adults, because we are all adults. And if you're not an adult, grow up. Have that discussion. Be mature. That sounds harsh. But you got to learn conflict resolution sometime. You got to learn conflict management sometime, and now's a good time to start practicing. When something comes up that bothers you as a person, say, hey, let's deal with this right now. Let's figure this out. If it's safe to do so. And D&D should be a safe place to do that. Now, when we had that discussion off stream, what was said was, oh, I did not realize that I am really not okay with child death. We didn't talk about that in session 0, but I never realized it. Previous DMs that I've had didn't have that in their games, and now I see why. Can we not do that ever again? And I said, yeah, you got it. No more child death. Not a thing in this world anymore. Because that is the human thing to do. That is the empathetic and kind and morally right thing to do. You don't torture your players unless they agree that they're okay with their character experiencing that thing. If they agree that it's fun narratively for them, you don't go yanking on things like that. Now, if it's something they have explicitly said don't do, do not do it. Just don't. Be kind. Be reasonable. If you find out that it's something that genuinely does bother them, cut it out. Say, yeah, no, we're not going to do that anymore. Because, and this really is the first rule of the game, real life comes first. Real friends come first. And maybe that's the first thing you say at session 0. Ultimately, though, you need to discuss what's going on in your game. You need to talk about how you deal with conflict when it comes up, how you deal with uncomfortable topics when they show up and someone's at the table is not okay with it. You need to have those discussions early on so that you don't get blindsided with something and someone doesn't feel like they've got a safe way to talk about that with you. Because after all, you're the person who's creating the world. You're the person who's deciding how difficult or easy it is for their character to survive and accomplish their goals with their friends. And so, session 0 needs to happen. Now, there are some people who say session 0 shouldn't happen. They should just jump in and play the game. Cool, if you can do that, if you know your people really, really well, and you can predict all the stuff that could go wrong, great, fantastic. I have yet to meet someone like you. Every game is different. I don't care if you played with the same people for 1,000,000 years. You can still be surprised. Someone may not take the standard route of conflict management with this particular issue, whatever it is. Just have the session 0. Grow up and have a discussion with people. If you can pull it off, great. Fantastic. Good for you. I can't. I'm not going to risk it because my friends are more important to me than running a game. So, do you have to have a formal session 0? Not necessarily. If you can have like an extended discussion with your friends where they understand, like over weeks of Discord messages or whatever, or weeks or days of seeing each other at work or at school, pay attention. You can still have the session 0 content without sitting down and saying, like, this is our session 0 and we're gonna figure this out. That's okay. But just don't go in blind. For the love of your friends, don't go in blind. So what should be in your session 0? I've talked about the merits of it and ways it's helped me. What should be in your session 0? I think that you should have a discussion of player behavior at the table. Are you allowed, if you're of age, to show up and consume alcohol? Are you allowed to, if you're in person, are you allowed to smoke at the table? That kind of thing. Basic etiquette stuff. Who's bringing drinks? Who's bringing snacks? Do we rotate? Plan that, because it's important to stay hydrated and not get hungry, because hungry people make bad decisions. Thirsty people can't talk. very well. You know, make these decisions. Figure out who's doing what. And what you expect of one another in terms of behavior at the table. How do you resolve areas of conflict when they show up? You also want to talk about your ethical considerations. What are your taboo topics? Where are your no-no areas, your no-go zones? For us, child death is now one of those. We don't want to have another issue that we don't want to have in our game is slavery. We just don't want it to be a part of anybody's backstory. But we agreed that that it might show up in the game in different societies, but that it would be rare in the world. That's another thing that we talked about with our session 0. You know, you want to talk about your ethical areas. You know, how are we in terms of our party composition? Are we going to play any characters that could identify as being evil? You know, and I want to talk about a little bit about the setting and say, you know, what kind of reaction does the law have to people who are aligned with chaos? Because the alignment system is something that exists in Dungeons and Dragons. Barely now, but it does exist. You know, we want to talk about, you know, law and chaos, good and evil, neutrality, that kind of stuff, if you can, if it's important to your group. You want to talk about, you know, what they can expect from you as a dungeon master. This is a great time to say, hey, I'm new at this, and so we're going to go with the rules as best we understand them. And if corrections need to be made, we'll make corrections. You know, something that I always do is I always say, hey, so I've been doing this for a long time. I might get additions mixed up in my head. If I get confused about something, I make a bad ruling. I'm sorry. We'll correct it for future stuff. And if I forget a rule, then we'll make a ruling right then and look it up later and apply it that way in the future. That's a really great way to do it for my purposes. You want to talk about fuzzy game mechanics that people don't really understand very well. You want to talk about maybe how reach works. You want to maybe talk about how hiding and stealth works. You want to talk about initiative and how you're going to handle that. You know, combat order, how you're going to handle that. You want to talk about, you know, well, what can you expect from combat? How difficult can you expect it to be? Are we playing a grimdark sort of thing where, you know, you get a scratch and that'll get infected and you die? You know, or are we going to be basically invincible super soldiers, you know, or something in between? You want to talk about those things. You also want to talk about character creation and what's expected of folks there. You know, how you handle your stat generation, for example. How you handle what classes and races are restricted. In Vibe Check, we are limited to the player's handbook races. And new ones are unlocked as you encounter them in the world. We actually had a really interesting party discussion. Alex Penny, A Penny Price, she really, really loves Kalashtar. And we introduced a Kalashtar NPC in the last session 2 weeks ago. And she freaked out. She was like, why you gotta tempt me like this? Because now she's able to play a Kalashtar if she so chooses. If she were to send Ilya away, she to sort of like sit as a secondary character somewhere after this, she could play a Kalashtar if she wanted. Or if Ilya, God forbid, died, she could play a Kalashtar character. We want to talk about character death, by the way. We want to talk about how resurrection works. And how resting works, how HP gain and loss works for this party, and what people are okay with. With Vibe Check, I've got a homebrewed rule for resurrection stuff that's really, really neat, and folks agreed to that. But session 0 was the time to talk about that because we had a player say, "I have a really, really negative experience with character death, where the DM just had my character die." And nobody could do anything about it. Is that something that we can expect here? And I said, no. If you die, it's because basically you earned it, but I'm never going to put you in a situation that is absolutely impossible to survive. If you're in an impossible situation, it's because your character made decisions that landed them in an impossible situation. And we'll work together to do whatever we've got to do. But it's possible to die, but don't expect to die in every combat. We saw that with Arabella Vanias, our former druid, played by my friend Ashley. She put herself in an impossible situation, and her character died. But we understood how that worked. And so, while it was very sad, while it was very upsetting, we saw that there was a reason for it. And we saw that it was fair. It sucked. But them's the breaks. The dice were not with her. Simple as that. So you want to talk about these things. You want to talk about all kinds of stuff in your session 0. But do have it. It's worth having. Because beyond giving you just sort of like problem-solving stuff ahead of time, it does something else for you that's really, really cool. I want to talk about that for just a minute, okay? So, first, quick recap on the Session 0 stuff. You want to have a Session 0. It only helps you because, primarily, because it helps everybody at the table understand exactly what kind of game they're playing. Okay? It helps them understand exactly what kind of game they're agreeing to play. And everybody walks into the game knowing that everybody else understands. That's the big thing. It also gives you tools for when conflict shows up unexpectedly in the game. And it allows you to say, this is how we deal with it when somebody finds out that this upsets them. Or when we have a conflict in the understanding of the rules. Or whatever. You know, this is how we understand it. Because we can say together, we said back in Session 0 that we'd do it this way. Are you still going to do it this way? If not, we need to work it out. By the way, Session 0 is not set in stone. It's just the thing that you agreed to right then. And if that changes, well, then you need to have an adult discussion and change it together. Because again, tabletop role-playing games are a collaborative effort between friends to have an adventure or tell a story together with the help of a dungeon master or a game master. Okay? So, what is the other thing that Session 0 does for you? And this is my favorite part of this, because it's a little sneaky. It's a little bit sneaky. What Session 0 does for you, in addition to giving you great conflict resolution skills, great avenues for avoiding conflict to begin with, and setting expectations and boundaries, what it does other than that is really awesome. It tells you, if you're paying attention, what's important to your players. Okay? Recently, I wrote a guide because there were some jokes going around about how I was making everybody in my campaign cry and just breaking hearts all over the place with the events that were going on and how I described stuff. The guide was called "Make Them Cry," keys, or making your players cry, or something like that. Keys to emotional impact. One of the things that I talked about in that was know what your players find important. Know what's important. Session 0 tells you what's important to your players. They'll tell you when you talk about the setting of the game, the campaign style. When you talk about those 3 pillars that we talked about earlier: exploration, social interaction, and conflict or combat. When they tell you those things, you know that those are the sorts of things that are important to them. And so it gives you categories to kind of look at things through and say, like, well, okay, it's important to my players in Vibe Check that they have good social interaction stuff. It's important that they have good exploration stuff. It's important that they have interesting combat, but that's not a focus. Well, what that tells me is that they're interested in people and their stories, and in seeing cool stuff in the world, and occasionally fighting somebody because they threaten that stuff or those people. Simple, right? Well, I can listen through that and say, okay, how is that important to them? They're all really empathetic people. They all really pay attention to the feelings and actions of others and their motivations. And it's important to them that the lives of good people go well. And they will probably act when the lives of good people don't go well. Or when the lives of evil people are getting in the way of the lives of good people. Right? So I can take that stuff and say, okay, well, good people are important to them. And something that they especially gravitate toward is sweet people. People who are kind and gentle and considerate. People like them. So that gives me some handles. It gives me opportunities to set up situations in the world that are really interesting to them as people, and so their characters will be interested in those things. Because I have this theory about player characters, is that we are all pretty much playing some form of dirty self-insert in the story. It doesn't matter. Every character's got a piece of you in it. Doesn't matter who it is. Every single NPC in the land of Tanadine has a little bit of maybe 30 bats in it. Has a little bit of Jordan in their personality. Even the bad guys. And that's okay. Maybe the bad guys are an antithesis of parts of me. Maybe they really disgust me because they offend my sensibilities. But Session Zero gives you those handles. It lets you know what's important to your people. It lets you know what's significant to them and how they want to interact with the world. So you can take these situations and do that stuff. Session Zero is sort of your key to interesting worlds being built with your characters and your players. Session Zero really is sort of the key to understanding how you have a smooth game that is hooky. A smooth game that grabs your players and makes a world that they want to tell stories about for years. And that's what this is about. Sitting around a table with your friends, rolling some dice, following some rules, and giving them the most opportunities to have fun. Your goal isn't purely to terrify, or to boss them around, or to hurt their characters. You're not an adversary. Your goal is to provide them with situations that interest them, that give them a chance at fun, so that they can tell their story and have fun doing it with you. And they can tell your story with you. So that's the goal. And these are some tools for that. But for now, that's all that I have to say on this stuff. I've been talking for, an hour and a half. It's time to hear from you. What do you want to know? Let's enter the Ask Me Anything portion of this stream. And yeah, ask me anything, guys. D&D Q&A with 10-year DM, maybe 30 bats. Eddie K, my BFF Jill. What do you want to know? I'm here, I'm hanging out. Or maybe there's a place where you disagree with me, and that's cool. I want to hear that stuff too, because that's good discussion. Like I said, stick 5 GMs in a room, you're going to get 15 opinions. And that's just the NPCs. Oh, hey, I've been visited by my cat. Hello. He's a very sweet kitty. A good baby. So if we've got any questions, I'll take them. I'll answer them. Otherwise, I could talk a little bit about, I don't know, anything. Stuff that's going on in Vibe Check, stuff that's going on in Biggie Small's Adventuring Company, which is a game that I play in as a character. I play a stout halfling paladin named Link Ableton. He has a terrible Irish accent because I do a terrible Irish accent. I've probably offended the vast majority of Irish people by that accent, including my ancestors, and I'm only kind of sorry. You shouldn't allow the Lucky Charms leprechaun to happen. Just, yeah, stuck a guy with a real thing. How do you start the party meeting? Okay, so that's pretty cool. That's something that you can cover in session 0, but sometimes that depends on the kind of campaign that you're going to run, right? So let's say that you're running your standard high fantasy adventure campaign that's primarily built around primarily built around exploration and combat, and social interaction is sort of tied with combat in terms of like how important it is to your campaign, right? That's sort of your Lord of the Rings thing, right? It's exploration primarily, social interaction is important, but combat is sort of tied with it for importance, right? Well, how do you start the party meeting? You've got some options, right? One of the things that you can do, which is a very traditional way to start a campaign, you meet in a tavern. It sounds silly, right? But you could agree, that they're all in this tavern. They're travelers out for some reason, right? We see this we see a version of this in the second campaign of Critical Role, where we have everyone in their various small cell groups meeting in the same tavern. Vibe Check started in a tavern. We had decided that these characters were already friends. We decided this in session 0. We decided they were already friends, that they already all sort of knew each other a little bit, and they were all in this tavern looking for work. You can say that, or you can start sort of in media res. Have them in the middle of combat, or in the middle of a tense negotiation where they're trying to secure something, and then you fill in the details and say, your client really wants them to. The client really wants this shipment to come through. How can you guarantee that? And the dockmaster replies. You can do that kind of thing. You can have individual session 1s with your characters, or with small groups of your party. This works great for larger parties who need to have some cohesion before they show up and know who they are a little bit. You can say, well, okay, you two are from the same monastery. You're a monk, you're a fighter, but you're still, that kind of thing. Just whatever makes sense for your party. Ask them. Something that's important for me to ask my players before we start the campaign is, okay, I need you to pick one person in the party that you know and who knows you. Right? What this does is it helps solve some early problems in clunkiness in roleplay. When we started Vibe Check, we said that Arabella Vanyas knew Ilya. Now, this may have gotten a little lost in the shuffle, but she did know Ilya distantly. They knew each other well enough to trust each other to work together. That's all you really need. All the relationship development stuff can come later as they interact with each other. Alvin, the mountain dwarf, he was known to the party, but he was new. Like, the party had come across him together prior to their meeting. Lorenzo Nightbane is actually a really great example of this. Cheese character. Lorenzo Nightbane was a guy who didn't have an elaborate backstory, but he did have a connection to the party. He was in the original party that went out with Elvira the Bard to go check out the iron mine shortage, and he was captured by goblins. Elvira escaped. Now, Elvira was originally intended to be played by Alex of Stars in the Sky, but she ended up not having room in her schedule to play, so that worked out the way it worked out. But we had that connection to the party, and that's how the party knows Lorenzo, right? As he came and rescued them from an ambush, middle of the campaign. Same kind of story with Crew Valus. Devin's character. Crew was rescued by the party from his imprisonment in the Goblin camp. You have to come up with a way that your party is embroiled in this situation together. It may be that they all are freelancers, and they're hired by the same person, and so they have to work together, even though they don't know each other. One way that is really great to get ideas for how parties can start, watch adventure movies. I'm serious. It's a super useful tool. Think about how Lord of the Rings starts. They don't start off as the Fellowship of the Ring. That happens later when they discover that they have to go to Mordor, right? They start off as, well, we've got this halfling from this pair of halflings who are best friends from this village, and the wizard comes. We'll say what he is. This Azamar wizard shows up and brings these halflings to a tavern. A couple other halflings show up and go with them. They're friends, neighborhood boys, Well, in the tavern, that's where they meet the mysterious ranger. And then later they meet this elven archer, this absolute machine gun of a guy. They meet this dwarf at this meeting, and all of a sudden they have a common quest. So the real key thing is figure out a reason that your party has a common quest. Okay? Or a common circumstance. Usually this is fairly easy, right? Because in the first part of your campaign, you might have a basic mission that you want them to go on. For me, it's investigate the iron mine. And dear Lord, we have spent forever getting there. But we've had a great time doing it, right? They're there together because they have been sent out by the mayor of the town of Agamoon to go check out the iron mine shortage. Simple as. And so that's why they're together. They're going there. They're not there just because they're friends. They're not going there just because they've been through all this stuff. They're there because they've been sent on a job together. And it's up to them to build those connections as they adventure. That's what their role-playing is partly for in that situation. So is that making sense, Spade? Is that helping? Because I could talk about, party cohesion and stuff like that for a while. But yeah, that's the basics of it, is find a common situation for them to be in. And if you're having trouble coming up with why they're in that common situation, ask your players. Ask your players. That's such a vital tool to GMing, is ask your players. Say like, okay, so why are you in this town? What are you doing there with your friend? Party hooks are awesome. I'm glad that was helpful, Spade. Party hooks are awesome. And you can come up with that stuff forever. You can write a D1000 list of that stuff. But yeah, so one thing we didn't talk about was sort of like, and gosh, I mean, if I wanted to talk about all the things to do with GMing, I'd be here for days. Yes, they are completely different, but not completely unrelated to story hooks. That's a great point, Chi. Story hooks take you somewhere. Party hooks take you to someone. Maybe that's an oversimplification, but yeah, that's true. They're completely different from story hooks, but they are not completely unrelated to them. Something that's a little nebulous in the way that people talk about like driving the plot of an RPG or a tabletop game. Something that's a little nebulous in that stuff is story hooks or plot hooks or however you want to talk about, like the things you lay out as options for your players. It's kind of boring for a person to just say, here are your options, 1, 2, 3. It's a little more interesting to just lay those things out there for them to discover. And when they ask, like, well, what's around? Point them to one of them. And let that one point to the other two. That's a simple scheme, but it takes skill to pull off, and you'll build that skill pretty quickly. I'm confident. Excuse me. But yes, it's a good it's a good situation to be able to set up your players for success, right? You can say, well, here's this. Okay, here's a good way to think about it, right? Is that a story hook is more like a table full of food, right? Story hooks are more like tables full of food, right? And you've got a plate, and you can go through the buffet. Character hooks, party hooks, are more like a funnel that you pour something into, right? That you're pouring your party into. It's one location, one reason to be together, into which they are all gathered by their circumstance. If that makes any sense. Story hooks are like a buffet, and party hooks are more like a funnel. That's a terrible set of analogies, but I hope they were helpful. Yeah, so there's that stuff. Anything else we want to talk about? I think I've talked that one about to death. Oh man. And it usually helps to have your story hooks leading toward at least one of your major story hooks, right? Leading toward the next step in the story that you want to tell together. So when we're talking about that story, when we're talking about like the campaign, right? The main storyline, if you will, we have this tendency as GMs to think that that's like the only thing that's important, and everything else is just them, to quote another podcast, just them going to bullshit town. And that's only sort of true. Because if you'll remember, the point of the game really is just to have fun. And so anything they do that has fun is accomplishing the goal of the story. But if the overarching story of the campaign, you do want to always provide a way that they could advance that. Okay? They might not be completely on task every session, but if they were, it'd be kind of a boring story, wouldn't it? Sure, it would be an epic tale, but it'd be one that you could tell in 3 minutes. Not one that you have to tell individual stories from for years to really get the sense of what it was like to be there in the room when you did these things. So at least one, I would say, find a way for all of your story hooks. They should all, ideally all, but you're never given an ideal situation. As many as are practically possible should point toward the next part of the advancement of the story. Okay? And your players will also come up with their own story hooks that are related to them and their characters' motivations and desires. That's a really good thing. That's less work that you have to do to come up with stuff. It's a little more work that you have to do on the fly to kind of like accommodate that, but it's still really fun for everybody. So to do that, you need to know what the next part of your story is. Since I've got players in this stream and players who will probably watch this VOD, I'm not going to tell you what the next step in vibe check is right now, but it is related to the thing that they're chasing. It's related to this stuff to do with the Iron Mine. It's related even to some of the tensions back in town in Agamoon between a couple of different families and a couple of different organizations. Basically everything points to the next part. And it's important to be able to do that, because you never can tell what your characters are going to do. You never can tell what your players are going to have them do. And that's okay. Our job is to be adaptable to that in that regard. So yeah, I would recommend that you have an idea as to the overall arc of your campaign, and point everything sort of in that direction, or point things to the things that point in that direction. Make the world discoverable. If there's one piece of unsolicited advice I can continue to give you, it's especially about secrets. Secrets, when it comes to role-playing games, are really only as good as their reveal. I'm going to say that again. Secrets are only as good as their revelation. I don't care if your character came from a background where they were experimented on by the government and their skull was carved with arcane sigils to give them psionic powers. That's a PC that I had in a game. I don't care about that until you give us a chance to show the rest of the world that fact. Because it's only gonna get so cool if you're the only person who knows about it. Think about like anything that ever happened in a TV show that you watched. Anything where some big thing came to light, changed everything. It wouldn't have changed anything if it never came to light. Wouldn't have changed a thing. The world would have kept going, the story would have kept going, it probably would have gotten stale. If you reveal your secrets in meaningful ways, they change the story for the better. One of the things that we talked about in our session 0 for Vibe Check was whether or not it's okay to have secrets from the GM. It's not. You know why it's not? Because I don't have the chance to help you reveal the secret. So, secrets are cool when people find them out. But don't just tell them the secret the second that they get close to you. Don't just tell them, and this doesn't have anything to do with Vibe Check, don't just tell them when they meet you, "Hi, I'm Nebish the Warlock, and my patron is the Great Old One. He talks to me in my sleep. My sister was killed when I was 4 years old by some of his cultists, and they took me and raised me as their own." Like, that has no emotional weight to it. But if you've been traveling with Nebish the Warlock for 6 months, you've faced dangers together, you've seen him do great and terrible things, And then one night, you see the source of his power, or a glimmer of it. And he doesn't tell you anything about it. But you get a sinister feeling. Isn't that much more interesting? Isn't that far more fascinating and better storytelling? This is what we call show, don't tell. If you must tell it well. Don't just vomit your character's backstory out. Don't just vomit your NPC's backstory out. Don't gloss over stuff that's interesting, you know? There's an NPC that, there's an NPC that the party is never going to meet because they died before they really met them. This guy was going to be a double agent for some sinister group working to see if he could get information out of Crew Valus while he was captured. That would have been a really fascinating guy to work with. I decided to cut him from the story because it was going to get too clunky with some of the stuff that was going on. But he would have been the party's friend. And he would have betrayed them. They'd have hated that. But it would have meant something because they didn't walk up and he didn't say, well, yes, I'm a very bad man. I've been pumping him for information, you see. Instead, it would have been a betrayal where someone ends up saying, Arcanus, how could you? You are my friend. You sold us to them. You know, like that's a very different experience. It means something. So, again, secrets. Have them. Reveal them. They're only worth having if you can tell them. So there's that. Anything else that we want to talk about? Anything you want to throw out there into the world? We're gonna try and do this on Wednesdays. Just talk about running the game and setting stuff up and planning a campaign, executing a campaign, dealing with players when things are difficult. Spoiler alert on that one. Usually it's talk to them like a grown person. Like have an adult discussion. But yeah. Anything else that we want to talk about? Because we're coming up on 2 hours, and that's about as much time as I want to spend continuously talking like this. I might stream a game or something here soon, but no, I'm pretty much done just yammering on about this stuff. Unless someone's got another question for this week. Anything that you disagree with on anything that I say, anything you've got a different take on, maybe not a disagreement, just a different nuance. I'm always willing to learn. Always be willing to learn. I'm good to do that as well. If anybody's got time to do it, interest in doing that. Oh my. I hope we're doing well tonight. Hoping that everybody's staying safe from the Rona. It's been kind of a long day for me. I ended up so sleepy earlier, but yeah. Feeling on homebrew rules. My feeling on homebrew rules is that you need to be very, very careful with them. The rules have been written in whatever system. They have been written the way that they have been written for pretty good reasons. Typically, what we don't see is all of the balancing and tweaking that goes into the development of a game. I've been fortunate to be a part of that process with an RPG called Duskhaven. which a very good friend of mine from grad school. Shout out to Carthen. I don't know if he wants me to put his whole real name out here, but he's developed that game and maybe running a game of it soon, playing in one. But there's so much tweaking and balancing that goes into writing an RPG system. It's all an integrated thing. And so changing any one thing requires some very careful consideration. That's why we have things in D&D like the optional rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which are different ways of doing stuff that doesn't like break the game. It also gives warnings about like, you know, this is how you could screw it up. But that's why we have things like the Sage Advice, the Sage Advice errata for D&D, and the official Twitter accounts that talk about, you know, like how things actually work when stuff gets confusing and weird. But I'm for homebrew rules as long as they are written well and respect the existing framework and structure of the rest of the rules. And everybody else is comfortable with using those rules and understands what they mean. Okay? That's one of the reasons that I don't allow the use of unearthed arcana in campaigns that I run, because often that stuff is still being balanced. It's playtest material, which means that it's probably broken as shit. It means that somebody's gonna get overpowered, and I don't think that it's necessarily wrong for something to have a lot of power, but I do think it's necessarily wrong for someone's build to suck the fun away from other people. If combat is important to one of your players, you don't want to have a broken build in your game. You want to have interesting combat in your game. And if you can't have interesting combat without broken builds, get good. Think about things. Learn about small unit tactics. Learn about the monsters that you're using. Learn about the environment that you're putting them in. Learn about your character's weaknesses and strengths. Get good. But homebrew rules in general tend to be a little wonky. So if you're going to use them, analyze them well, understand how it can unbalance parts of the game, if it does. If it doesn't, then cool, whatever. But if you're going to use homebrew rules, understand them thoroughly so that you are not giving an opportunity for someone's fun to get robbed by someone else's cheesy bullshit. Or whatever. A great example of this is basically like how a lot of people handle carry weight and like pack weight in D&D. Technically, there are encumbrance values. And a lot of campaigns choose to basically ignore them because it's a pain in the tail to track encumbrance and weight. Usually there's some sort of common sense rule integrated there that says, like, we're not going to track encumbrance, but don't go trying to carry a refrigerator around. You know, that kind of thing. You know, don't get silly with it. And you have to sort of talk with your party about, like, what silly means and, you know, stuff like that. It gets a little fiddly. But I'm not always necessarily, like, a rules as written kind of guy on a lot of things. When it comes down to, like, making sense of stuff, I'll default to rules as written rather than rules as interpreted or rules as intended, depending on who you ask. But yeah, that's how I think about homebrew rules. Is if you're going to use them, understand them extremely well and understand the rules they are replacing extremely well and their relationship to other rules. So that's my piece on that. If that's helpful. Other GMs have different opinions on it. They'll basically let whatever happen, and that's cool. If that's your table, that's the way that the folks at your table want to play. Cool, have fun. It's a game. But there's a wonderful face to freeze on. It's a game. Have fun. But for my purposes, I'm more interested in preserving fun for the most people possible. and so I don't tend to go with homebrew rules unless it really makes sense to do it. Yeah, that's where I'm at on that stuff. I'm gonna grab this water. Any other questions we want to entertain tonight before we get out of here? I can probably do another 15 minutes or so on this stuff. One homebrew rule that we do have, I mentioned this, is the way that we treat resurrection. It keeps the existing rule for the spells that are cast. So whatever it is, you've got to have your verbal somatic material components, right? So for the spell Revivify, which must be cast within 1 minute of the death of the target, it's a verbal somatic, so there have to be words, there have to be emotions, and there's a material cost as well of diamonds equaling a value of at least 300 GP. When that child in that combat died, we had to see that in action. Well, we added at my request in session 0, we added a condition to resurrection spells, a chance of failure. Now, this chance of failure is pretty harsh at the beginning, because when you try to do this, if you look at the scale of difficulty in Dungeons and Dragons, it goes from 0 to whatever you want it to go to, but the standard scale is from 0 to 30. Okay? 0 being you can do it without even trying, like don't even bother rolling, and 30 being roughly impossible for like mortal beings. So it's a DC difficulty class of 30 to successfully cast a resurrection spell of any kind. It's functionally impossible. Why? The reasoning is that you are wresting power from the gods and doing something they do not want you to do. So, when it comes time to resurrect someone with, say, Revivify, you've got to pass a DC 30 spellcasting check. Now that requires the creation of a special skill called spellcasting, which is tied to your spellcasting ability. And the way that we've constructed that skill is like we've constructed most other skills in D&D, is that we make it tied to an ability score, and we give you proficiency in it. Proficiency being a scaled bonus that's applicable across the level spectrum, rising as you level at specific intervals. And so there's a spellcasting check that you have to roll. So you would roll your d20. You'd roll your d20 and compare your result. That's what we've got there is a 17. Let's say that your spellcasting ability is tied to your wisdom. You've got a +4 to your wisdom because you're really, really wise, and you're proficient. And so your proficiency bonus at this point is, let's say, a +3. So that's a total of +7. That's a 24. Not enough. The spell fizzles and dies. The body lies there, unmoving, unbreathing. That does a couple of things. It provides risk. It also provides drama. But the homebrew thing about this, the really new thing about this, besides the spellcasting ability check being added, is that there's a way to lower that difficulty class to make it more possible by injecting more drama, more meaning to the event. The way that you lower that DC is you have people who can do it offer some meaningful contribution to the resurrection ritual. Each person who adds a meaningful contribution to the resurrection ritual, whether that's a memory or a trinket or just a loving touch or something that's actually meaningful to the person who has died, you lower the DC for each person who does that by 5. So if you get 6 people to contribute meaningfully to the ritual, it just goes off. But you've got a meaningful scene there. We did that for narrative reasons. Entirely for narrative reasons. Now, does it mess with the ability of the spells to do what they were designed to do by the game designers? Yes. Are we willing to accept that risk? Apparently. So we had that discussion and we said, okay, so here's the possibility. Do you want to go for it? I think it could be really cool. And they said, sure, we're willing to try it out. And always be willing to throw away a homebrew rule. If they decided that they hate that rule in the future, then okay. We can talk about getting rid of it. But if it's just emotionally meaningful that they failed one time, probably should keep it because it's meaningful, right? But anyway, that's a homebrew rule that we have in Vibe Check. Something that I really enjoy as a GM, and it's something the players seem to appreciate. So that's where I'm at on homebrew rules. Anything else? We've got maybe 10 more minutes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I modified that from some stuff that that Matt Mercer does with Critical Role and their deaths. He's got a different way of handling it, of course, but I liked the idea of there being contributions to the death, to the raising of a dead person. But I also wanted there to be risk. And so that's how I handled it. But it's fun for us. So, Spade, are you thinking about running a campaign, man? Yeah, you know what? I will. I'll go ahead and drop the link to that session 0 checklist and guide in the chat here. It's good stuff. You don't have to use it word for word. You can add whatever you want to for it. That thing's not the Bible. You can add and take away. Session 0 tomorrow in your homebrewed world. Hey, way to go! Way to go! Proud of you, man. That's good stuff. What size group are you working with? Two players. Okay, so you're buddy copping it. That's gonna be fun. Something that you may run into, housemates. Oh, good, awesome. Something that you may run into with that. 2 players is often difficult to balance combat for. A rogue and a bard. Okay, so something that you're gonna find possibly difficult to do is balancing combat encounters for them. I would recommend that you keep it very small, okay? But that you keep your bad guys interesting. Okay, what I mean by that is don't just stand them up and say, you know, you hit him, you hit him. You hit him, you get hit. Your combats are going to be over in like 2 seconds, and they might not be very fun. Now, if instead you have a bad guy saying like, you know, I know these 2 guys are coming after me. I'd better lay a trap. Or I'd better set... There you go. If they need backup, it'll be available for them. That's good. But try to make sure that they're able to save the day. You know, if they're constantly getting rescued, that's going to be a little demoralizing. But yeah, like, make your enemies creative. Make them interesting. Make them, you know, ambush predators and, you know, people who set traps and or people who separate them from stuff, all that stuff. They're both very new to the game. That's good. That's good. New players are often easier to deal with if it's your first time GMing. And I don't know that it is your first time GMing, but yeah, new players are often easier to coordinate because they tend to listen to the GM. Your second campaign, very cool. Okay, so you're aware of some of this stuff for sure, but yeah, new players are gonna look more to their GM or DM for guidance. That's gonna be a key thing there. But you know, let them make their decisions, let them make their choices. It's gonna be cool. I'm excited for you. You'll have to keep us in the loop on how that's going. But yeah. So we're starting to enter like the last 5 minutes. Anything else we wanna talk about? What's some stuff that you're kind of stuck on for your campaign that we can talk about for like 5 minutes? Anything at all, whether it's Max Pack's gonna be NPCs in your world. Oh, that's so cool. That is incredibly cool and super flattering that you would put us in your world. That's cool. Thank you so much. That's incredible. For anybody who's watching this who doesn't know what this is, Max Pack is a group of characters of which I'm a part from TikTok. The Max Bar tag. Need to check what they really want from the game. Yeah, please do. It's only going to help you. It's only going to be benefits. That's going to be fun. That's going to be cool. You'll have to let us know. Is it mostly sort of like is it mostly exploration or? Okay, looking more for exploration than combat. Okay, that's gonna be cool. So what's one thing that you're like super excited about showing them in your world? Good. Pre-planned overplat's always helpful. And you know what? If this isn't something that you're already doing, and this is a great tip for new GMs all over the place, is have a pre-planned like plot going on, and if your players don't like go in for it, let it continue anyway. Don't make it just like a static thing that only moves when they touch it. Something that I do a lot, and I'll talk about this, you know, in a later stream. Keep diary entries for the important NPCs in your major factions, and update them every time you play, whether or not the players touch it or not, right? Using the cults from Mordenkainen. Okay, that's gonna be fun. That's gonna be really, really fun. So what this journaling thing does is it gives you practice acting those NPCs. It also moves their plots along and keeps the world a dynamic place. And it allows you to say, you know, the players did this over here and this affected them this way, so this is why they care about the players. Wizards have essentially been wiped out, so there's a cult preserving their knowledge. That's cool. That's really cool. So why is it a problem that they preserve the knowledge? Can be working in the background. That's good. So why is it a problem if they preserve the wizard knowledge? Is it because like there's a wizard bias? It sounds like there is, like an anti-wizard bias. That's cool. I like that a lot, actually. And see, like I can learn all kinds of stuff just from y'all like this. Also features a homebrew class. Okay, cool. Ugh. That's gonna be dope, dude. Homebrew classes you have to be especially careful about. They tend to be pretty unbalanced. So, if you've got a homebrew class and you're committed to it, Weave or taking over the cities had to be essential. Okay, cool. Had to be essentially destroyed. So if you've got a homebrew class in your party and they're like dedicated to it, and you've already said yes to this, and you start discovering that there are places where it's unbalanced, talk to that player and say, hey, look, I want to make sure that everybody else still feels like they're having fun, so I'm gonna have to introduce some stuff that's like hard counters to the things that good. Okay, it's a non-player home class. That's good. Try introducing hard counters to that in your combats, like stuff that just like shuts them down, but gives your other players an opportunity to shine. A great example of this in like the official rules is the Circle of the Moon Druid, right? Circle of the Moon, tanky as all get out, right? Basically, once that build gets online, they are getting wrecked. Whoever it is, they're not gonna stand in the way of that tank. But put one spellcaster with Moonbeam, and all of a sudden life gets impossible for that character. You know, stuff like that. And it's not you picking on the character, it's not you picking on the player, it's you making sure that combat stays interesting. Never bully your players, right? That's good stuff though, that it's that you're testing it in an NPC first. That's cool. You wanna make sure that your stuff is balanced. That's an important thing. Send you the world history if you like. Yeah, please do. Feel free. Yeah, send it to me on Discord. I'd love to have it. It's not super extensive. Hey man, it's something. How many other people do you know who have written a world history? I have. Mine's like 5,000 years of history, but I've also, you know, been playing in that world since I was in college. Happy for the party. Yeah, man. Happy with it for the party to explore. And if you've got gaps in that stuff, like I said, just like sketchy notes on the surrounding areas, you know, maybe let them feed stuff to you, you know, like that's something a lot of GMs will do and just don't tell anybody about it, is that they will walk into a situation and be like, I have no idea what it is, but they let their players' assumptions guide them. That's a really great thing. Let your players' assumptions guide you. As they explore, reveal more and maybe build on it from their theories. Yeah, definitely build on it from their theories. It's such a great tool. Well, okay. We've been at this for just over 2 hours. 2 hours, 20 minutes almost. And I could talk about this all night, but we're gonna have something to talk about next week, right? So I'll definitely catch you then. But for now, really helpful. Thank you. I'm glad. For now, let's call this good. Y'all have a good night. It was great seeing you. My camera's going to shut off one last time just to screw me. And we'll see you later. Night, guys. Spade, go to bed.